My name is Victor Hale. I am 38 years old, a surveyor by trade, and a man who has spent more nights beneath the canopy of eastern forests than under my own roof. I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia, and the Monongahela National Forest was the background of nearly every season of my life. I fished its creeks, camped along its ridgelines, and learned the way fog can swallow a valley whole before sunrise. I have never been a superstitious man, though I've met plenty of locals who won't set foot in certain hollows after dark. But what happened by that river last fall made me reconsider what alive really means when it comes to the woods. It started simple. Too simple, maybe. I'd been hired to check boundary markers along a stretch of the Cheat River, where a small outfitter planned to build a seasonal lodge. My work was solitary, the kind of job that fit me best. I'd walk the line with my GPS, mark coordinates, drive stakes, and camp by the river until I'd mapped the full section. 3 days, maybe 4. The forecast was clear, and late September had turned the trees into copper and fire. I loaded my truck with my usual gear: a tent, waters, tackle box, measuring equipment, and enough food to get by without lighting a stove too often. I don't like drawing attention, not even from curious hikers. The drive took me deep into the forest, past the logging roads where cell service died. I parked at the edge of an old trailhead near the Cheat South branch, locked the truck, and started in. The path had been reclaimed by moss and roots, but I could still make out the shape of it, a depression in the earth that told of long use long ago. The deeper I went, the quieter it grew. The forest there isn't loud like out west, no wind tunnels or crashing limbs, just a low, steady hum of life that somehow feels aware of you. By evening I reached the river. The water moved slow and deep, reflecting the overhanging sycamores in a mirror that looked too perfect to be real. I remember thinking how peaceful it seemed, that kind of calm that invites you to stay a little longer than planned. I set camp 50 yards back from the bank, cleared a patch for the tent, and built a small fire. The forest was heavy with the smell of wet leaves and iron-rich water. I wrote down my boundary notes, then decided to fish for a while before dark. That's when I first leaned against the sycamore. It stood taller than the rest, its trunk pale and smooth, except where patches of bark hung in rough sheets, curling outward like paper left near flame. I rested my back against it, cast my line into the current, and let my mind drift. The day had drained quiet. Not even the frogs spoke. I could hear the soft rasp of water against the stones, the occasional tick of bark cooling behind me. A single leaf spiraled down and brushed my sleeve. When I looked up, the bark above my shoulder had peeled back in an odd pattern, curved ridges like lips pulled into a grin. I blinked, thinking the shadows were playing tricks, but then the bark twitched. The layers flexed inward, as if something beneath was tightening its hold. Between those folds, pale grooves caught the dying light, and for one impossible second, they looked like teeth. I stepped back fast, my boot catching the root behind me. The bark stilled. I stared until the world dimmed around it, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. There were just strips of bark, I told myself. The human mind loves faces. It finds them everywhere, even in wood grain and rock. I even laughed under my breath to shake it off, though it sounded thin in that open silence. I reeled in my line, packed up my tackle, and told myself I'd had enough fishing for the day. Still, I didn't like turning my back to that tree. That night, I dreamed about chewing, not loud or animalistic, just a wet, steady grind like something working through tough bark. Each bite came with a pulse rhythmic, almost calm. When I woke, the fire had died out, but I could still hear it faintly beneath the hush of dawn. I sat up, heart pushing at my ribs, and listened. The sound was coming from the riverbank, the sycamore. I told myself it was just water against driftwood, the way logs sometimes creak when they shift. But when I stepped outside the tent, the air felt thick, warm, almost damp, like the breath inside a closed room. Mist hung over the river, and through it I could see the sycamore's shape half-shrouded. I crouched, watching. For a long time nothing moved. Then, from somewhere deep within the trunk, came a single soft crack, followed by another. Not the splinter of falling wood. It sounded deliberate, like pressure from the inside. I left it alone, packed up early and started marking the northern boundary. Work steadied me, and soon enough the rational part of my mind had taken over. The forest plays tricks. Sound bends. Maybe something lived in that tree, a raccoon, maybe even a squirrel nest. I kept repeating that logic until the idea of leaving felt foolish. I had 3 more days' work. I wasn't going to spook myself over some hollow bark. By afternoon, I'd covered 2 miles upriver. The forest was quiet again, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every heartbeat. At one point, I paused to drink and heard a faint rustle behind me. I turned. Nothing. Just trees, broad, indifferent, unmoving. Yet the feeling lingered, that sense of being watched not from afar, but from all directions at once. When I made camp that evening, I picked a clearing farther from the river. The sycamore wasn't visible anymore, but as dusk fell, I found myself glancing back down the slope anyway, expecting to see its pale trunk glowing through the dark. I didn't light a big fire. I ate in silence, noted my coordinates, and crawled into the tent before the moon rose. Sleep came slow. Every time the wind moved, I thought I heard that same grinding sound beneath it. I woke in the dead of night to something brushing my tent. A light drag like fingertips over nylon. I froze, listened. The sound came again, soft, deliberate. Then it stopped. I waited a full minute before unzipping the flap. The air outside was cold enough to sting. My flashlight cut through it in a narrow beam. Nothing moved. The forest around me was still as a photograph. But when I swept the light toward the path I'd come from, I saw the faintest trace in the dirt. Shallow lines, parallel, each about as wide as a human finger, leading toward the slope below. The river's way. I followed the tracks only as far as I dared. They disappeared near a cluster of saplings, but when I panned the light across their trunks, I noticed one had a mark near the base. Fresh gouges. 4 small indentations, evenly spaced, sunk deep enough to show raw wood beneath. They were too clean to be animal, too deliberate to be chance. That night I slept little. My dreams came heavy again, filled with the wet crunch of wood splitting under invisible jaws. Morning broke dull and colorless. I debated leaving, telling myself I had enough data to file the report anyway. But that's not how I work. I finish what I start. Besides, I didn't want to admit to myself that I was afraid. Fear's a funny thing in the woods. It makes you aware of your own heartbeat in ways you can't explain. Every twig snap turns into a thought. It knows where you are. By midday, I was near the final boundary marker, close to where the creek curved through a narrow gorge. That's where I found the deer, or what was left of it, half buried in leaves, its ribs exposed clean as carved ivory. No blood, no sign of struggle, just the body hollowed out, the bones polished smooth. Around it, bark shavings. I picked one up. The edge was frayed as if gnawed. The smell was wrong, not decay exactly, sweet, resinous, almost like sap. My chest tightened. I turned a slow circle, scanning the trees. The nearest sycamore loomed about 20 feet away. The bark around its middle was missing in irregular patches, strips hanging down in a way that reminded me too much of peeled skin. And near the base, faint but undeniable, I saw shapes that shouldn't have been there. Rows of curved impressions forming a crescent. Too even for natural decay, too smooth for rot. They looked like bite marks. When the wind rose, the hanging bark swayed and tapped against the trunk, making a soft clatter that sounded eerily like teeth chattering. I stood rooted there, the forest pressing close, every instinct telling me to go. But my hand reached instead for the camera clipped to my belt. I raised it, focused, snapped one photo. Just one, and in that instant the bark above the mark shifted. I heard it, the low grind again, deep within the trunk, followed by a sound that didn't belong to any tree, a slow, heavy exhale. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the camera. The air felt alive, vibrating in my throat. Then came another sound, like wood creaking under tension, but it wasn't the tree bending. It was something inside, moving. I ran, through the brush, up the slope, not caring where my gear lay or which path I took. I didn't stop until I reached the old trailhead, lungs raw, legs shaking. Only then did I turn, expecting maybe to hear pursuit. But the forest behind me stood still, unmoved, almost tranquil. Nothing followed. Still, as I stood there catching my breath, I noticed something strange. The sound of the river carried faintly through the trees, soft and distant, and under it, like the echo of a whisper, came that same steady rhythm: chew, pause, chew. When I finally climbed into my truck and slammed the door, the echo faded. Or maybe I just stopped hearing it. That was the last time I went into the Monongahela for work. But it wasn't the last time I heard that sound. I didn't tell anyone at first. You don't come back from a contract in the woods and start talking about trees that breathe. People already think surveyors get cabin fever if they spend too long alone. I filed my report like always: coordinates, conditions, suggested paths for access roads, and kept the details about the sycamore to myself. But the memory clung like sap. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that grin carved into the trunk, those pale grooves flexing like they were made of something soft, not wood. A week after I got back, I took my camera to a friend of mine, Sam Dixon, who runs a small photography shop downtown. I'd told him I wanted to print some field shots for documentation. He didn't ask questions, just loaded the memory card. But when the image of the sycamore came up on screen, something went wrong. The monitor flickered, colors draining until the picture looked almost monochrome. At first, the tree appeared normal. Just a tall trunk, patches of missing bark, sunlight on the river behind it. Then the focus shifted, almost like the photo was breathing. The ridges in the bark deepened, and a shadow opened near the middle, thin at first, then widening into a slit, then a curve, a grin. "Damn," Sam muttered. "You edit this or something?" "No," I said. He squinted at the screen. "It's weird, like motion blur, but in a still. You see that?" I saw it, the teeth. They weren't clear lines, more like the memory of teeth. Impressions that the camera hadn't meant to catch. But they were there, faint and too human. Sam reached for the mouse to adjust the contrast, and when he clicked, the screen went black. Then static. He cursed, restarted the computer, and when it came back, the photo was gone. Corrupted file. The others were fine. "That card's cheap," he said, half apologizing. "Happens." Maybe it did, but the hair on my arms wouldn't lie down for the rest of the day. That night I dreamed again. This time, I was back by the river, leaning against the sycamore. The bark felt warm under my palm. A voice, not quite human, not quite the forest, murmured beneath the skin of the wood. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the cadence. It was saying my name, over and over, gentle as breath through leaves. When I woke, I could still hear it. "Victor, Victor," fading slowly into the sound of the ceiling fan. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. It happens after long trips. The mind keeps running even when you stop moving. I took some time off, fixed the leak in my kitchen, caught up on paperwork. I avoided the woods. For 2 weeks it worked. Then the smell started. It came from the corner of my living room. Sweet, resinous, and faintly metallic, like sap mixed with something that shouldn't bleed. At first I thought something had died in the walls, maybe a trapped mouse. But when I pulled the furniture away and checked the floorboards, there was nothing. Only a dark smear along the baseboard, the texture rough like tree bark. That night the sound came again, not from the dream this time, but from outside the house. A low creaking, like a tree bending under wind. But the air was still. I looked out the window. The moon was half full, enough light to paint the yard silver. Nothing moved. Yet in the corner of the yard where the fence met the woods, something pale caught my eye. A trunk. There hadn't been a tree there before. I would have bet money on it. The ground was bare last week. But now, just beyond the fence, a thin sycamore stood where none had grown. Its bark gleamed under the moonlight, smooth and bone-colored. I watched for a long time, waiting for movement. The wind picked up eventually, brushing its upper branches. They swayed just enough to whisper. But it wasn't the leaves that moved. It was the trunk, subtle flexing, a slow twist as though it were turning to look at me. I shut the curtains. For 3 days I pretended it wasn't there. I worked indoors, kept the lights on, and avoided the window after dusk. But the smell grew stronger, seeping into the kitchen, the hallway, my clothes. I started dreaming again, close, up flashes of bark folding over skin, teeth grinding through wood. On the 4th night, I woke to a sound from the front porch. A single heavy creak. like weight shifting on the boards. My pulse jumped. I sat up and listened. Another creak, then silence. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and edged toward the living room. The house was dark, but the smell of sap was stronger than ever. Thick enough to taste. I aimed the beam at the window. Through the glass, I saw it a long smear of dark residue across the porch railing. Not blood. Not exactly, something thicker. The air outside moved. A shadow passed over the porch light. I caught a glimpse of something tall, pale, bending at the waist. For a second, it looked like the trunk of a sycamore had grown legs. Then the porch boards groaned again and whatever it was slipped out of sight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun rose, I went out with a shovel, half ready to confront whatever prank my mind had staged. The yard was empty. The ground by the fence was torn up, though. Clumps of dirt thrown aside. Deep furrows where roots had clawed downward. No footprints, no sign of tools. Just the faint outline of bark impressions in the soil, as if something had stood there long enough to take root. That afternoon I drove back to Monongahela. I told myself I was going to prove it was all in my head. I'd go back to the river, find that same spot, take photos, and show myself that trees don't move and wood doesn't eat. Logic could win if I forced it to. The forest was different in October. The leaves had turned, and the light came down in thin gold ribbons. As I hiked in, I felt the air shift, colder near the ground, warm higher up, like the forest was breathing in uneven rhythms. I reached the river by late afternoon. My old campfire ring was still there, half buried in leaves. The sycamore stood right where I'd left it. From a distance, it looked smaller, sickly even. The bark had darkened in spots, curling inward instead of outward. I walked closer, every step stirring that old dread in my chest. The closer I came, the clearer the shape of the grin became, wider now, deeper the grooves cutting almost halfway around the trunk. Something new had joined it. Near the base, fresh etchings, human maybe. Lines carved with care VH, my initials. The ground around the roots was torn, as if something had dug upward from beneath. Sap, or something like it, oozed from the open bark, slow and viscous. I crouched and looked close-up. It wasn't clear like resin. It was cloudy pale, like saliva. I took one step back, then another. The forest was completely still. No insects, no birds. Just the sound of the river and beneath it, something faint. A slow, rhythmic creak. I realized after a few seconds that it matched my breathing exactly. Then it changed. The creak quickened, almost like panting, and the grin widened. The bark along the trunk began to ripple. Thin shreds peeled back, curling and falling like skin. Beneath it, layers of darker wood flexed and split, revealing rows of jagged ridges. Those same teeth I'd seen before, now clear as daylight. Wet strings of sap stretched between them. The smell hit me, sweet, rotten animal. I stumbled backward, hitting the root and falling hard. The tree leaned, just slightly, but enough to make the whole trunk groan like something alive. From the opening came a sound I can't forget, a wet crunch, followed by the low echo of breath. I ran again. I wish I could say I looked back, but I didn't. I left my bag, my tools, everything. I reached the truck after dark, shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. When the engine finally caught, I floored it until the forest disappeared in the mirror. I drove straight to town and didn't stop until I reached the first gas station with lights. I sat there under the fluorescent glow, trying to breathe. The clerk asked if I was okay. I said I'd hit a deer. He nodded, probably used to half-truths from people who come out of those woods. When I got home, I burned my boots. The soles were covered in that same sticky residue. Faintly sweet, faintly red. That should have been the end of it. I wanted it to be. But 3 nights later, I woke to a sound in the hallway, soft, dragging, like bark scraping drywall. And then a breath from right outside my door. When you wake to a sound like that, slow, patient, you don't think first, you freeze. The body takes charge before the mind catches up. I lay there, every muscle tight, ears straining. The scrape came again, closer this time, followed by a dull thump, as though something heavy leaned against the wall. I reached for the flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it toward the crack beneath the door. The beam caught dust drifting in the air, and something else. A thin line of sap had seeped under the frame, sticky and pale, gathering in a small amber pool on the floor. I didn't move for a long time. The sound had stopped, but the smell, sweet, metallic, hung thick. When I finally found the nerve to open the door, the hallway was empty. The marks on the wall, though, weren't imagination. 4 grooves trailed down the plaster, each about the width of a human finger, pressed deep enough to expose white gypsum. The lowest mark ended near the baseboard, where small flakes of bark lay scattered like scabs. That's when I realized it wasn't coming in. It was growing in. The corner where the hallway met the ceiling looked different in the flashlight's beam. The paint there had begun to bubble, the way tree bark bulges before splitting. I backed away, shaking, and slammed the door shut. For hours I sat there, waiting for dawn, repeating the same useless logic. Hallucination, exhaustion, contamination, anything but the truth. Yet when sunlight finally crept through the blinds, it revealed something I couldn't rationalize. The wall beside my bed bore faint impressions, as if roots had pressed it from the other side. I packed by noon. Essentials only: wallet, keys, 1 change of clothes. I didn't bother locking up. Whatever was happening, I wasn't staying in that house another night. I drove without direction for hours, passing small towns and empty farmhouses until the radio began to fade into static. Eventually I stopped at a roadside diner, mostly to prove to myself that normal life still existed. The waitress brought coffee. I drank it without tasting it, staring at the wood-paneled walls that reminded me too much of bark. There was an older man at the counter, maybe late 60s, gray beard, flannel shirt that looked as old as the diner itself. He kept watching me in the mirror behind the bar. When I finally met his eyes, he gave a slow nod, like he'd been waiting for something. "You from around here?" he asked. "Used to be," I said. He tapped the counter. "You've been in the forest lately?" It wasn't a question. I hesitated. "Yeah, work." He nodded again. "Monongahela."
"Yeah." The man sighed.
"You see it, didn't you? The white tree." I didn't answer. He didn't need me to. "They say it don't stay put," he went on quietly. "Root finds what it remembers, follows what fed it. Don't matter where you run." I tried to play it off. Small laugh, a shake of the head. "You've heard stories, huh?" He looked at me hard. "You got sap on you right now. Can smell it." I glanced down. He wasn't wrong. My sleeve, where I'd brushed the wall that morning, still had a faint sticky patch. "Burn it," he said. "Don't bury wash. Fire's the only thing that tree respects." He left a few bills on the counter and walked out without another word. That night, I found a cheap motel 2 towns over. The carpet smelled of bleach. The walls were thin, but at least there were no trees nearby, just gravel and streetlights. I stripped the shirt, the jacket, the boots, and burned them in a metal trash can behind the building. The smoke rose fast, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes in it, thin twisting figures like roots pulling apart. I slept, finally, though not peacefully. In the dream, I stood once again by the river. The sycamore towered in front of me, mouth wide open now, full of wet wooden teeth. Something hung from those teeth, a shape I couldn't name, not animal, not human, something caught mid-birth. It whispered through the grinding bark, words I couldn't make sense of except for one. When I woke, the pillow was damp with the same faint resin smell. I checked my arms and found a streak near my wrist, like sap had oozed from my own skin. I left before sunrise, drove west with no plan, stopping only when exhaustion forced me to. But the forest doesn't care about maps. 3 states later, in Ohio, I caught sight of a sycamore through the motel blinds. Pale bark, smooth trunk, standing perfectly still among darker trees. It shouldn't have been there. The lot had been cleared last winter, according to the owner. I didn't go outside. Just stared until the sky lightened, half expecting it to move. When it didn't, I convinced myself it was paranoia. But each new town, each new stop, there was always one tree like that. Not close enough to touch, not far enough to forget. After 2 weeks on the road, I ran out of excuses. You can't run from something that doesn't chase. It only waits, so I went back. I told myself I'd finish the story my way. Burn that sycamore to the roots. End it where it started. Maybe then it would stop following. Maybe then I could sleep again. The trailhead was almost unrecognizable under winter's first dusting. Snow muted everything, the trees bowing under the weight, but I could still trace the old path down to the river, every turn etched into muscle memory. The closer I got, the thicker the air became. No wind, no sound, just that smell, sap and iron and decay. The river was frozen over except for a narrow ribbon of moving water, black against the white, and there, at its edge, stood the sycamore. The grin had grown wider still, stretching nearly to the roots. Snow didn't cling to its bark. It melted as it touched, steaming faintly in the cold air. I carried a small can of fuel and a lighter. My hands shook as I doused the base of the trunk. The liquid ran down the grooves, disappearing into the open mouth like the tree was drinking it. When I flicked the lighter, the flame caught fast. For a moment, I thought it worked. The fire climbed up the bark, snapping bright. But then the sound came low, guttural, angry. The trunk pulsed once, twice, then split with a wet crack. The flame was drawn inward, swallowed whole, and the tree breathed out. A gust hit me hard enough to knock me backward. The air shimmered with heat even as snow fell around us. Through the smoke, I saw shapes writhing inside the trunk. Faces, countless, mouths open in silent chew. The bark around them flexed like muscle. Then came the voice, layered and many, speaking in rhythm. Victor Hale. Victor Hale, we fed you, now feed us. The ground beneath me shifted. Roots broke through the snow, curling like fingers around my boots. I hacked at them with the hatchet, but each swing only met something softer than wood, warmer than earth. Sap splattered my pants, thick red tinted. I got free, barely, stumbling up the bank. The river ice cracked behind me. A sound rose from the sycamore, half scream, half laughter. I didn't look back until I reached the ridge. When I did, the flames were gone. The tree stood untouched, steam rising from its base like a sigh. I drove until my fuel light came on, didn't stop until I saw city lights again. Haven't gone near a forest since, but last week, I woke to a sound in my apartment, the creak of wood shifting. The landlord swore the building had no sycamore beams, all steel frame. Yet when I pressed my ear to the wall, I heard the faint rhythm again. Chew. Pause. Chew. And in the corner of my living room, where the light from the window doesn't quite reach, the paint has started to crack in a pattern I recognize. A slow, spreading grin. I'm writing this down because I know what's next. The tree doesn't need roots anymore. It's learned to grow in us. It's been 31 days since I left the Monongahela behind, and yet it hasn't left me. The walls of my apartment seem to hum at night. Low, resonant, almost imperceptible until silence deepens enough to catch it. It's not electricity. I shut off the breaker once, sat in the dark for an hour. The sound remained. I keep the windows open now, even in winter. The cold helps me think, cuts through that heavy, sweet smell that lingers no matter how many candles I burn. I've stopped inviting anyone over. The last person who visited, a co-worker dropping off files, paused in the hallway and asked if I'd been working with lumber. Smells like fresh, cut wood, he said. I told him I was refinishing a table. The lie came easy. Lies always do when they protect something unspeakable. I spend most nights documenting, writing down every sound, every flicker of motion at the edges of my vision. The notes have become less organized lately, more like warnings written to myself. If you hear chewing, don't look directly toward it. If the bark smell sharpens, leave the room. If the walls breathe, don't breathe with them. It helps to see the words, though less every day. The tree has begun whispering again. Not loud, not always clear, but close, too close. It speaks through the grain of my desk, through the hollow frame of the door. The same voice that murmured under bark by the river now hides in plaster and steel. It says my name the way the forest did, like a thought that never ends. I've taken to sleeping on the floor in the center of the living room, away from walls. It doesn't matter. Every morning there's new residue near where I lay, fine dust, not sawdust exactly, but something softer like ground pulp. I sweep it, and by dusk it's back again. 2 weeks ago, I started coughing up fragments of something, tiny brown flecks that tasted like rotten sap. I went to urgent care. The nurse asked if I'd inhaled smoke recently. I lied again. They ran tests. said my lungs looked irritated but clear. I didn't ask for copies of the scans. I already know what's growing there. Last night was the worst so far. It began with tapping inside the wall, not rats, not pipes. Rhythmic, deliberate. I followed it, ear pressed against the drywall, tracing it from the corner of the living room to the hall, then to the bathroom. The sound was strongest there. The mirror trembled slightly in its frame. I lifted it off the wall. Behind it, the plaster was cracked, a jagged line running vertically like a scar. Something darker oozed from it, sticky amber, faintly sweet, sap. When I touched it, the warmth beneath was unmistakable. Not room warmth, body warmth. That's when the whisper came clear this time. Victor. I stumbled back so fast the mirror shattered against the tile. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the whole apartment went black. In the dark, I heard the crack of wood splitting, the sound of roots dragging through insulation. I left. Didn't pack, didn't look back. I've been staying in an old motel on the edge of town since then. Room 12. The kind of place where the air conditioner rattles and the carpet smells of dust. I picked it because the walls are concrete, not drywall. The only wood in the room is the door. I sleep with the chair wedged against it, though I don't think it'll matter if it decides to come through. 2 nights ago, the TV came on by itself. Static first, then a faint pattern, grainy black and white, shapes moving in rhythm. I watched, frozen, as the image steadied. It was the sycamore. The same curve of the river behind it, the same half-light sky, except now the grin reached all the way around the trunk. The teeth moved, slow and grinding. And then, between frames, something stepped into view. A figure made of bark and shadow. It leaned toward the screen, its face featureless except for a familiar indentation where a mouth should be. Rows of faint, pale ridges. Teeth carved into wood. When it opened that mouth, the sound came through the TV speaker. A crack of splitting timber followed by a slow, wet breath. Then it said, "You're the seed." The screen went black. I smashed the TV. Left it in the parking lot. That voice hasn't stopped repeating those words since. Sometimes in my head, sometimes from places that shouldn't have sound. The sink drain, the vent, the hollow of my throat when I try to swallow. You're the seed. I think I understand now. The day I leaned against the sycamore, something passed between us. Not infection, not possession. Something older, a trade. The forest doesn't lose, it spreads. Yesterday, I noticed something under my skin. Small ridges along my forearm, faint at first, then sharper when I flex. The pattern matches the bark I saw near the grin. I tried cutting one open, just to see. Sap, no blood, oozed out. It smelled exactly like the air by the river that night. I bandaged it, but it hasn't stopped seeping. The man from the diner was right. Fire is the only answer. I've thought about ending it, burning myself before it takes more. But part of me hesitates. That's how it works, I think. It doesn't beg or chase. It waits, it roots itself through patience. The whispers are quieter today, though I feel movement under my ribs when I breathe, like vines curling inward. My palms leave faint brown prints on whatever I touch. When I drink water, it tastes like iron and wood smoke. I went for a walk this morning, down by the creek behind the motel. The air was still, heavy with mist. Across the water stood a single young sycamore, thin, pale, and swaying though no wind blew. Its branches bent toward me as if listening. I took a step closer. The ground beneath me pulsed, just once, like the forest taking a breath. The tree stilled, I waited. Then, faintly, I heard it again. Not a whisper this time, but 1,000 small voices blending into one. Root remembers root. I ran, but my reflection in the creek didn't follow right. My mouth stayed open longer than it should have. It was chewing. Now, as I write this, the veins in my wrists have turned the color of old bark. The skin around them feels thicker, rougher. When I press against it, there's a soft give beneath, like wet wood. Maybe I'm not supposed to fight it. Maybe that's the point. The forest doesn't kill, it converts. Every scream, every breath, every story becomes part of it, layer on layer. If you're reading this, don't come looking for me. Don't go near the Cheat River. Don't lean against anything that grows. I've sealed the motel room, ducked, taped the vents, blocked the door. There's a matchbook on the nightstand, and a can of lighter fluid from the maintenance shed. I've poured it in a ring around the bed. My hands shake too much to strike the match yet, but soon. The whispers in the ceiling now, it's patient. So am I. I think when the fire starts, I'll hear it breathe one last time. And maybe, just maybe, it'll say my name the way it did before the teeth came. Victor Hale. Then maybe the forest will forget me. The match wouldn't strike the first time. My thumb slipped on the damp cardboard, my hands shaking as though the tremor had reached my bones. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the lighter fluid fumes sharp in my nose, and tried again. The second match broke in half. The third flared, then died when I hesitated. I wasn't sure what exactly I was trying to burn. Myself, the sap inside me, the voice in the walls, the tree's memory, or all of it at once. The whisper in the ceiling had grown steady now, a low chant under the hum of the motel heater. Not words anymore, just the sound of chewing. I pressed my hands flat on my knees. The skin felt thicker, harder than yesterday. Lines of pale resin ran down from my wrists like veins of sap. They pulsed faintly, in time with my heartbeat. When I leaned forward, a faint crackle came from my spine, like branches settling in wind. I'd written my last warning in the notebook. Don't lean, don't touch, don't breathe with it, and closed it. There was nothing more to write. Yet as I sat there, I realized something strange the fear had dulled. Not gone, but muted, like the world beyond the room had slipped into a different season and left me behind. The smell changed first. The sweet, rotting scent of sap turned crisp, like a cold forest morning. Then the walls of the room seemed to draw back, not physically, but in the way they looked, edges softening, colors deepening into shades of moss and river stone. I blinked and saw my reflection in the black screen of the shattered TV. It wasn't my face anymore. The eyes were mine, but set deeper, ringed with wood grain. My mouth had a new curve to it, a shallow, rising grin. When I lifted a hand to touch it, bark cracked softly along my jawline. The whisper fell silent. A single knock came at the door. Slow, heavy, I didn't another knock. Then a voice, soft, patient. Victor, I knew it. Not the diner man, not anyone from town. The same voice that had been under the bark by the river. It didn't echo through the room. It was the room. You're the seed, it said again. Come home. I don't remember standing, but I was at the door, hand on the knob, lighter fluid soaking into my jeans. I opened it. The parking lot was gone. The neon sign, the gravel, the distant highway gone. In its place stretched a dim forest under a sky the color of bruised silver. Snow fell upward instead of down. The motel doorway stood alone, a wooden frame freestanding among roots that wreathed gently through soil black as ash. Directly ahead, a sycamore waited, taller than any building, its trunk pale as bone, its grin so wide it seemed to curve into infinity. Teeth like wooden stalactites gleamed in the half-light. Between them, the darkness pulsed like a throat. The figure from the TV stepped out from behind it, bark for skin, long fingers like roots, face carved smooth except for that mouthful of ridges. It moved without moving, one instant distant, the next standing inches away. The smell was overwhelming, sap, iron, and river mist all at once. It reached a hand toward me, and though part of me screamed to run, another part leaned forward. The fingers brushed my wrist, and where they touched, bark rose through my skin like frost spreading across glass. The tree spoke, not through sound, but directly inside my ribs. We do not kill. We remember. We root what was lost. We grow what was fed. I thought of the deer carcass, the bark shavings, the initials carved at the base. All the campers and surveyors who'd leaned, all the small lives it had taken into itself. Not eaten. Well, me. I managed. My voice cracked like dry wood. Because you stayed, it said. Because you looked, I fell to my knees. The ground beneath me felt soft, pulsing faintly, like a giant heart. Roots curled around my legs, not tight, just holding. A warmth spread up through my spine. I thought of fire then, of the matchbook still in my pocket. My fingers fumbled for it, but the bark on my skin had stiffened, making my movements slow. The figure's head tilted, watching, not angry, not even curious, just waiting like the forest always waits. I struck a match. It flared weakly, its tiny flame wavering in the strange air. I held it to my wrist, to the sap bleeding through bark. The flame bent inward, drawn like breath. Sap bubbled, hissed. The smell of burning wood filled my nose. The forest trembled. The grin in the sycamore twitched, rows of teeth clicking once like chattering jaws. I lit another match, dropped it on the ground where the roots touched me. Fire crawled up the bark lines, small but real. The warmth under me turned hot, then searing. The figure stepped back, its mouth opening without sound. The tree exhaled, hard, like a windstorm through a canyon. The flame flickered, nearly died, then it surged. Roots cracked, sap boiled. A chorus of whispers rose from the soil like steam, hundreds of names, layered and breaking. Victor Hale. Victor Hale. Victor, I screamed, though it came out as a groan of timber splitting. Bark burst from my arms, cracking open to reveal raw sap beneath. The fire spread up my legs, my chest, licking at the edges of my vision, and then silence. The forest froze. The figure dissolved into splinters that drifted upward like sparks. The sycamore's grin split wider, then cracked, teeth crumbling to ash. A column of black smoke rose from its core. For the first time since that day by the river, the smell changed. Not sap, not rot, just wood smoke. Clean, dry, final. I collapsed, the fire dying around me, my skin scorched and human again. No bark, no sap. My breath came ragged, but it was only breath, no rhythm beneath it. The ground was just ground, cold, dead. When I opened my eyes, the forest was gone. I was lying in the motel parking lot, snow drifting down from a normal winter sky. My hands were burned but whole. My clothes reeked of smoke. The doorway stood behind me, door swinging shut on its hinges. Room 12 looked empty and touched. I crawled to my feet, coughing, and looked toward the edge of the lot. No sycamores, just telephone poles and salt-streaked pavement. I left the motel before anyone could ask questions. Drove with the windows down until the smell faded. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, no whisper, no sap, just the memory of wood smoke on my skin. I should feel free, I should feel alive. But this morning, when I woke, my pillow was dusted with something fine and pale, not ash. Seeds. Tiny, winged seeds like the ones sycamores drop in spring. They were warm to the touch, and when I held one to my ear, I swear I heard a sound inside it. Chew. Pause. Chew. I kept the seeds in a jar for 3 days. That was my first mistake. At first, they seemed harmless, small, papery things, each with a faintly golden hue, like dust caught in sunlight. I didn't dare touch them barehanded again after the first night. The warmth hadn't faded. If anything, it deepened. I could feel it through the glass, subtle, patient. I told myself I'd drive them far out into the desert, leave them where no soil could take them. But every time I looked toward the door, something in me stalled. Not fear exactly, more like obedience, as if the thought of leaving them alone was a betrayal. By the 4th night, the air in my apartment changed. Heavier, not humid, but alive. I started hearing the low hum again, the one that used to fill the forest when it wanted me to listen. It came from the jar. When I leaned close, the seeds were moving, barely, just turning over one another, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat shifting in dry skin. I smashed the jar. They scattered across the counter, their warmth spreading into the laminate like spilled oil. I swept them into a paper bag, ran outside, and poured them into the dumpster behind the building. But as I turned back, something caught my eye. The old telephone pole at the alley's end had begun to peel, thin strips of wood curling outward in the cold air. The pattern was unmistakable. A grin. I left that night. Since then, I've been driving west. I don't sleep in motels anymore. I keep the windows open, the heater off, and the car radio tuned to static. The chewing follows anyway, faint from the vents, from the tires on asphalt, sometimes from behind the dashboard. It's quieter when I talk aloud, so I narrate everything I do, like I'm keeping the silence from thinking for me. I've stopped calling it the tree. It's bigger than that now. Maybe it always was. A forest doesn't end where the map stops. Roots don't need boundaries. 3 nights ago, I crossed into Kansas. Flat land, no forests for miles. I thought that would help, but the moment I stepped out to pump gas, I noticed something odd in the dirt by my tires. Hairline cracks shaped like branching veins, faint but spreading outward from where I stood. They pulsed once, then stilled. I didn't finish fueling. I drove through the night until I found an abandoned rest stop miles off the highway. The building had collapsed in on itself long ago, roof half gone, the sign out front sun bleached and unreadable. I parked near the ruins and sat for hours, engine idling, waiting for morning. That's when I saw her, a woman standing by the edge of the lot, long coat, pale hair unmoving. For a moment I thought she was lost, but then she raised her arm, and in the flicker of my headlights I saw her hand. Fingers split, bark gray, sap glistening between them. She smiled, not cruelly, almost gentle, and then she opened her mouth. I don't know how else to describe it but wooden. Her jaw cracked sideways, the sound echoing like a tree splitting under frost, and from that open mouth came a single breath, warm enough to fog the cold air, carrying with it the smell of resin and river water. Root remembers Root, she whispered. I drove, didn't even look in the mirrors. Now I'm somewhere in New Mexico. The land here should be barren enough, dry enough, dead enough to hold nothing living. And yet, when I stopped an hour ago to rest, I found something new on the side of the road, tiny shoots pushing through the gravel, pale thin and leafless. They grew fast. I watched them rise an inch in minutes, trembling like they were breathing. When I touched one with my boot, sap welled up from the crack in the ground, hot as blood. The engine won't start now. I can hear them under the hood, roots weaving through the metal, curling around the pistons, tasting for heat. I think they want warmth, life, memory. I'm sitting in the car. Doors locked, though it means nothing. The chewing is louder now, deep and steady beneath me. Every few minutes the vehicle shifts slightly, as if something vast is breathing under the earth. The air smells of wood smoke again, the kind that doesn't rise from fire but from the friction of growth. I've been thinking about what the voice said. You're the seed. It wasn't a curse. It was instruction. The forest doesn't die when burned. It scatters. One ember, one root, one breath, and it begins again somewhere else. Maybe I wasn't meant to destroy it. Maybe I was meant to carry it farther. If that's true, then I think I understand what's happening. It's not coming for me anymore. It's using me. The rearview mirror just shifted on its own. There's movement behind me. Shapes rising from the desert floor, tall and pale, catching the moonlight. They have no leaves, no branches, just trunks tapering into open mouths. Rows of faint teeth. I hear my name in the wind again. Not one voice, but many. Victor Hale. Root what you remember. My hands are changing faster now. Bark spreading past my wrists. Fingers cracking at the joints. Each time I move, sap seeps out warm and sweet. I can smell it filling the car. I think if I breathe deep enough, I can taste the forest in it. River mud, ash, deer bone, and something older than any of it. The chewing stops. The silence afterward feels endless. I step out of the car. The night is warm here, too warm for winter. The air hums with a low vibration that isn't wind. All around me, the new trunks sway gently, their teeth clicking in rhythm. I walk toward them, because what else is there to do? The ground gives under each step, soft and pulsing, like walking on breath. The largest trunk opens as I approach, its grin wide enough to swallow me whole. The inside isn't hollow wood, it's light, soft, golden, the same color as the seeds. For a moment, I think of the matchbook, of room 12 of the fire that didn't quite finish the job. The flame isn't gone, it's inside me somewhere, waiting for air. The voice returns, layered and calm. Root or burn, Victor, choose. I close my eyes. The warmth around me deepens. My chest tightens, cracks spreading under my ribs. I don't scream this time. The sound that comes out of me is different, low, steady, like wind through branches. I think I've chosen. If someone finds this phone, if it somehow sends before the signal dies, don't come here. Don't follow the sound of the chewing. The forest doesn't want revenge. It wants memory. It wants to grow in whatever listens long enough. I can feel my heartbeat slowing, replaced by something steadier. The air smells of sap again, clean, ancient. My skin tightens, hardens. The ground is cool against my legs. The hum is in me now, not around me. I look down at my arms. The bark has finished its climb. My fingers sink into the soil, and I feel the others there, hundreds, thousands, stretching far beneath the desert, touching, remembering. The stars overhead blur. Their light feels close, familiar, like reflection off river water. The last thing I hear before everything quiets is the whisper, soft and endless, "We remember you now."